Well, SABC News correspondent Stuart Smith joins us now from Kyiv in Ukraine with the very latest. Stuart, very good afternoon to you. This particular anniversary comes at a time when questions have been raised and intensified in terms of how this war will end and what role the Trump administration is currently playing. Just give us a sense about how the country is marking this day today.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind over the past few weeks, and it wasn't really expected that this is how the third anniversary would be commemorated, with the chance of peace on the horizon, but great fears about what exactly it would mean for Ukraine if peace is negotiated on its behalf without officials in Ukraine being involved in those discussions, as many in Kyiv perceive has happened so far, with Moscow and Washington talking to each other in Saudi Arabia and effectively setting the terms of any discussion about how this war should end. To counter that, there have been a host of officials coming to Kyiv on Monday, 13 of them from Europe, but also Canada and Iceland as well, and then online a few dozen more, all trying to show support for Ukraine, and all of those who have ended up coming saying the right things. The big concern though in Ukraine remains, while Europe says the right things and is able to provide reassurance that they will follow Kyiv's lead when it comes to peace negotiations, ultimately Kyiv says it still needs Washington's support, and that's why Ukrainian officials are in the United States trying to convince the United States to keep supporting Ukraine through this so-called Minerals for Security deal, an agreement that would mean Ukraine gives up some of its profits from its natural resources here in order to keep the US invested in its security. That deal getting close to being signed, according to the Deputy Prime Minister in Ukraine, but not yet fully sorted out.
Just talk to us about, diplomatic movements at this particular time, because we do know several European leaders are in Ukraine at the moment alongside the president of Ukraine. Just give us a sense in terms of what has been said from that front in terms of diplomatically how this war or how at least talks could be held with Russia and the US. Because conversations, as we know at this point in time, have really not included Ukraine.
Yeah, two things. I was listening to these leaders speaking earlier, these European leaders in Kyiv, and one that really stood out to me, who joined by video call, the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, said that they have practically agreed on two very simple points amongst themselves. The first is that a just peace cannot be confused with an unjust capitulation. And the second point he made was, nor can a temporary ceasefire be confused with a lasting peace. And even officials like Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, whose country is hosting the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov as we speak, is skeptical about what a Russian agreement is worth when it comes to potential deals, noting that the Budapest and Minsk agreements were broken as well, despite it seeming like these agreements were bringing an end to that conflict in the east of Ukraine since 2014. And so huge caution, huge skepticism about to what degree Russia can be trusted, which means Ukraine is desperate for security guarantees. And so the Europeans are saying they can provide them to a degree, but as UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said, again joining by video call a few hours ago, there would need to be some kind of US backstop, is the phrase he used. France and the UK have said they would deploy troops to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire, which could be some kind of, quote, reassurance force. But they would still need the Americans to be on board with whatever's going on. And so to that end, President Volodymyr Zelenskiy is desperate to get this agreement signed with Washington to show that Ukraine has something to offer the US, and in return the US could provide these guarantees to Kyiv. And he's also suggested and made a few noises around what he's willing to concede. For example, he says if it's the only way to peace, he said he will step down as president. And similarly, he said he's open to the idea of a all-for-all hostage deal with Russia as a first step in negotiations to try to build up some trust in the peace process, even if Kyiv and Moscow won't be trusting each other on the face of it anytime soon.
Very quickly, Stuart, as we wrap up our conversation, also one of the things that he did say as he was talking about him willing to step down as president, he says if it meant Ukraine's entry to NATO was guaranteed, if there is peace for Ukraine, if you really need me to leave my post, I am ready, quote unquote. Has there been any reaction to this?
Well, the Danish Prime Minister, speaking at that conference of European leaders, still says she believes it is the best thing for Ukraine, that it is the strongest possible security guarantee, the easiest way forward and the cheapest way forward, which is exactly what believes too. But there is no sense from either Russia or even the United States, and these two are really the two that matters when it comes to these negotiations, that either of those would be acceptable for Russia, because preventing Ukraine joining NATO was what it says one of the main reasons for starting this war in the first place, and for the United States because it just wants out of Europe at the moment. It's trying to step back, become less embroiled in European affairs, with a view in particular towards China, and allowing its military and security services to focus to the Far East rather than on Ukraine and Russia. So it's not something that either of those two would really accept.
Stuart, thank you so much for that. Stuart Smith giving us an update there on the day, of course, the third anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war.